Hey everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Feature 5. So this is going to be the new format of my more traditional ranking videos where I take the last 5 new to me games that I have played and I rank them from my least favourite up to my most favourite, providing reviews on the way. Now, I appreciate that some of you guys prefer the 10 game format, but to be honest, it's quite a difficult thing to sustain, and it means that I can't so regularly get videos uploaded, where if I break it down into 5 games at a time, then that's probably going to be easier to do. But we'll give it a trial run, and hopefully you guys will give it a chance. But before we get started on today's 5 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 5, I have Fireball Island: The Curse of Volcar. So this was definitely on my to-try list for a very long time. The gimmick appealed to me, the idea of having that big kind of injection molded structure, trying to move your little pawns around the board, collecting things. I'm trying to avoid those marbles that come down from the top of the volcano and knock your pieces over. That toy factor really did appeal to me, but I wasn't quite sold on the fact of maybe buying a copy for myself, but I'm quite lucky that my friend managed to pick up a copy for a very good price at the UK Games Expo, and we got it played pretty sharpish. So it's a difficult game to review because it is such a toy factor. It is a gimmick. The gameplay is pretty, paper thin, to be honest, where you're just playing cards from your hand. The cards will determine how many spaces you can move, and you'll pick up little tokens as you go, trying to collect little sets, and also try to visit 3 kind of prominent locations on the map and try to escape the board by going back to the helipad and leaving with your points essentially. But again, the twist is that every certain few actions or whenever you play certain cards, you will be rotating this big kind of volcano head at the top of the board, dropping marbles in it. They will run down these chutes that will go down randomized routes and hopefully knock off your opponents and knocking them to the bottom of the mountain and making them drop their set collection pieces essentially. That is what the game entails. It's very light, it's very silly in a way, but there are some laugh out loud moments. Sometimes it's fun just to play around and see how these marbles run down. But all in all, I think the shelf life is certainly short, but I suppose in its advantage, the game is short as well. So despite it being a gimmick, it's not a gimmick that outstays its welcome. The choices here are very obvious. You're just going to go to the next location that you need. But still, it was always fun when those marbles come down and cause some carnage. So, can't recommend it, but I'd say, if you can get it played, give it a go, just for that idea of checking it off your little to-do list, I suppose. So that is Fireball Island at number 5. At number 4, I have Formula Fun, which is certainly the obscure game on the list. This is a game we took a punt on at the UK Games Expo. It's a racing game, a card-driven racing game, where you have a number of cards on this very simple track. You're just racing around, and each lap, the car who's the furthest behind will drop out of the race and score a certain amount of points. So, of course, if you're dropping out earlier, then you will score fewer points, whereas if you're the last man standing, you'll score quite a heavy chunk of points. So the card play is pretty lucky, where you're going to mostly play cards matching on the location where you're on, because all these different spots your cards can land on have numerical values, and if you play a matching card, you will go that many spaces. So of course, if you're on a 10 spot, you want to play your 10 card and move 10 spaces, because if you play that 10 card and you're not on a 10 spot, then you generally move only 3 spaces, which is not great. You can do a few tricks to line up cards to have bigger turns later, but all in all, the decision space is fairly low and it's obvious about what you should be doing. The hand limit does come into play as well, because you do have some opportunities to kind of tack on cards to other played cards to give you a little boost, but that does mean that you go the rest of the game with a smaller hand limit, which can certainly come back and haunt you. So I do quite like that little touch. But all in all, I think there are better racing games out there. This one pretty more closely aligns with a game like Downforce. I think Downforce is a much stronger game than this one. But I do think the bare bones nature of this game does lend itself to some cool variants. Even when we were playing our first game of this, we were thinking of some ways you could kind of spice the game up a little bit. But although, the game's a little bit lackluster, and one of my biggest bugbears with the game was that after each lap, you pretty much reset the whole race, meaning that the flow of the game is broken quite regularly, and it feels a little bit stop and start, where you want your racing games to feel a little bit more dynamic and fast paced. So unfortunately this one didn't quite hold up to the great racing games. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad, but it's pretty mediocre. At number 3, I have Line It. So this is one of my most anticipated card games of last year. You finally got a chance to play this one. I tend to enjoy games where you're organising things. In this example, you are playing numerical cards, either going in an ascending order or a descending order. And what you're trying to do here is you're trying to create almost as long of a chain as possible, because for each card after your third one, you're going to start generating points, 1 point per card. But you can also play these kind of wager cards where if you play them at a certain point in your line, it will say that if you can play, say, 3 more cards after this point, then you'll score some bonus points. Or you can even take bigger chances by playing these +5 cards, where you'll say, after this card, if you can play 5 more cards, then you'll score 5 more points. The game is essentially just that, as well as some card drafting and hand management, because you have a very small hand of only 2 cards in this game. Meaning that if you have some cards that aren't really ready to be played there yet, you need to be quite lucky in the fact that any cards in the display will fit your order quite well without having those huge jumps, because of course you cannot fill in those gaps between those gaps, or can't fill in the numbers between those gaps. Once you've gone from 50 down to 25, you're going to have to start working from 25 downwards, which of course is squeezing your options down and down as the game progresses. Now, I did like that decision of, do I reset my line now and go again from fresh? But bearing in mind that the first 3 cards I play are not going to score anything, or am I going to commit to this line and keep on going? So I did quite like that. But all in all, it's a nice one. Again, I think the decision space is fairly low. It's not exactly a taxing game, and you're going to have to be lucky with the way the cards come out. But if you do like that idea of organising things, putting things in lines, and pretty much that beer and pretzel style game, this is a good example of that. And I'll certainly keep it around, and I will never really turn a game down like this, because I like my little card games like this. So that is Line It at number 3. At number 2, I have Big Top. This is an auction style game with some set collection, with some pretty neat twists. So I've played a lot of auction games over the years, and have a lot in my collection, and I'm always interested to see little twists and little new takes on this genre of games. And I certainly think Big Top managed to pull that off to quite an interesting degree, because in this game you are just simply collecting cards to score points. Some cards are mandatory, so you need to get at least one of these golden stars in order to be eligible to score at all, which you can use as leverage, which I actually did in my initial game of this. And there is that idea of whoever's putting a card up for auction will get the money off the winning bidder. So that cash flow between the players is a really relevant part of the game. You need to know when you have the leverage. You need to know how much money your opponents have in their coffers, really, to know when you can kind of hold back, or know when you can definitely win something. But the coolest thing about this game is that when you bid with certain figures, so say, for example, I bid a 7, any previous card that I've collected with a 7 on it, I will kind of get a token from the bank and put it on that 7, meaning that I'm one step closer to completing that card and make it eligible for scoring. So the bids you're placing out is actually an important part of the game. And as you can imagine, as people are building up more and more cards in front of themselves, you might be able to use that to your advantage, because you might know that your opponent needs 3 8s in order to complete 3 different cards. Therefore, I'm going to start the bidding at a 9 to prevent them from completing those cards, which is really interesting. I like this one a lot. It was really cool. I'm not sure if it's up there with the great smooth auction games like High Society, but it's not too far off. And again, that one novel concept of the actual numbers or the numerical values that you're bidding being such a strong part of the game, I think that does enough to separate itself from so many of the others. So definitely interested to play this one quite a bit more, and I enjoyed it a lot. So that is Big Top at number 2. And finally, at number 1, I have Harmonies. So Harmonies seems to be getting a bit of momentum at the moment, seems to be a bit of a slow burner. But this one is a puzzly style game, obviously with a nature theme. And these styles of games seem to be really blowing up over this last couple of years with games like Calico and Cascadia coming out. But Harmonies for me is the best one that I've played, and that is saying a lot already because those other games I mentioned are also very good. But Harmonies manages to seem to bring in lots of interesting different factors into a very harmonious game, ironically, where you are drafting, I believe it's 3 tiles at a time, and placing them on your pretty tight little boards. You have a very tight little grid where you're placing these different tokens on. These tokens represent different terrain types. So you've got your water, you've got your kind of bricks, you've got your woods and your plains, that kind of stuff. And not only is the orientation of those pieces important, for example, your longest river will score points, or you want like your plains in little groups of 2, that kind of standard stuff. But also, whenever you complete a particular pattern based on these cards that you're drafting, you will kind of you have these cards, and but each time you build this pattern, you're going to remove the next lowest token and place it on your board, unlocking a certain amount of points, but also meaning that you cannot score again for that particular configuration. But it does mean that you can still use existing pieces on your board to contribute towards that configuration again, as long as that animal piece doesn't go on the exact same space. So you can really use this mind mapping to try and place things as efficiently and optimally as possible, and I really love those styles of games. A game that did this quite well recently was a game called Forever Home, where your patterns are synergizing and interlocking as you go. This one really takes that and elevates it to a whole new level, not only in terms of the dimensions, but also because this game is 3D as well, so you're actually placing tiles on top of each other to build these configurations. I enjoyed this one thoroughly. It's so punchy, it only takes around half an hour to play. The brain burnery nature of the game really shines through, but it's not too kind of AP prone. Good drafting, knowing what to commit to, knowing what you can pull off. There's some modules you can add in. That 2-layered puzzle of trying to complete my cards as well as trying to place the terrain optimally is really interesting, and you're always going to be engaged with this game. Kind of like a quintessential great Gateway Plus style game, and I think this one's going to be an evergreen. I think it's going to stand the test of time and hold its own against games like Cascadia once the wind captures under this one's sails, because it is that good and that high quality of a design. I'm really looking forward to playing this one some more, and again, if you like these breezy rule set style games but with tough decisions, a nice aesthetic, definitely a wide appeal, then it doesn't really get much better than Harmonies. So there we have it. Hopefully you have enjoyed this first episode. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.